September 2nd, 2015. A Dallas pediatric dentist leaves work on an ordinary Friday afternoon with her life completely planned out. She's heading home to pack for a romantic trip to Mexico with her boyfriend the next morning. She's already imagining the conversations they'll have on the beach about their future together. She has no idea those conversations will never happen. She has no idea that someone has been watching her every move. Someone has been learning her routine. Someone has been waiting for this exact moment. Because waiting in that parking garage isn't a random criminal. It's something far more calculated. It's the end result of months of obsession, digital stalking, and a jealousy so consuming it drove someone to spend their own money and risk their own freedom just to make one person disappear. This is the story of Kendra Hatcher, and this is the story of the woman who couldn't let her go. Kendra Hatcher grew up in small-town Illinois surrounded by strong faith and stronger values. Her family taught her that a meaningful life meant using your talents to help others. That belief shaped everything she became. She went to college, then dental school, understanding the whole time that she was building skills not just for a career, but for a mission. When she graduated and got her degree as a dentist, she could have done what most professionals do. She could have opened a luxury practice in an upscale neighborhood and made excellent money seeing wealthy patients. But that wasn't Kendra. She looked at her skills and asked a different question. She asked, "Where can I make the biggest difference?" That's how she ended up at Smile Zone in Dallas. It wasn't the most prestigious dental office. The patients weren't wealthy, but they were children who desperately needed care and couldn't afford it. Kendra didn't just show up for the paycheck. She invested herself completely in every child who walked through that door. She understood that for many of these kids, dental care wasn't something they took for granted. When Kendra cleaned their teeth and fixed their problems, she was giving them something their circumstances had denied them. That mattered to her. It mattered deeply. And that wasn't even the full picture of who she was. Outside of work, Kendra spent her time on mission work. She went to Ecuador on her breaks from dental school, providing free treatment to people in remote areas. She led Bible studies for low-income children. She organized efforts to build churches in foreign countries. She lived with an intentionality that most people never achieved. Everyone who knew her understood this wasn't a performance. This was who Kendra actually was. This was her actual conscience at work. By 2015, Kendra had moved to Dallas and built a life that matched her values. She lived in an upscale apartment complex in the uptown area, but the environment was almost secondary to her. What mattered was that she was doing meaningful work and that she finally felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then, in May of that year, she matched with someone on Tinder. His name was Ricky Paniagua, but everyone called him Ricky. He was a dermatology resident at the University of Texas, handsome, educated, and most importantly, he seemed to share her values. He had the same kind of kindness she did. They connected immediately. By September, just 4 months after meeting, they were already talking about marriage. They were already planning a future together. Ricky was introducing her to his family. They were booking trips together. For Kendra, it felt like everything was falling into place. She was doing work she loved. She was with someone she adored. She was genuinely happy. But in Dallas, there was someone else who had been thinking about Ricky constantly. Someone who couldn't accept that he had moved on. Brenda Delgado and Ricky had been in a relationship for over 2 years before 2015. For Brenda, that relationship represented something serious. She wanted to marry him. She thought of him as her future. So when Ricky broke up with her in February 2015 because he had lost romantic feelings for her, it devastated her. But they stayed in contact. They remained friends. Brenda convinced herself that this was temporary. She believed that eventually Ricky would realize what he'd lost and come back to her. She held onto that hope. Then came the email in June. Ricky was being honest with her because they were still close. He wanted her to hear it from him rather than through the grapevine. He'd met someone new. Her name was Kendra. He was seeing her seriously. This was different from the other women he dated. For Brenda, that email was a line crossed. This wasn't just another girlfriend. This was someone serious. And according to everything that would later be revealed, Brenda made a decision in that moment. She decided that if Kendra Hatcher was out of the picture, Ricky would come back to her. That was the logic she constructed. That was the obsession that took hold. What happened next would shock even experienced detectives. Brenda began a digital siege against Ricky's privacy. She somehow obtained his email password and iCloud credentials. She hacked into his accounts and read his messages. She installed a location tracking app on his phone and watched where he went. She took screenshots of his intimate conversations. She monitored his flights. She photographed his documents. This wasn't casual suspicion. This was organized, methodical digital stalking. She knew when Ricky and Kendra were planning their Mexico trip for Labor Day weekend. She knew he was introducing Kendra to his parents. She knew they were discussing moving to San Francisco together to start their next chapter. And with each new piece of information, her obsession deepened. But Brenda understood something crucial. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help, and she needed to find people willing to do something she couldn't do herself. What followed was a truly shocking series of interactions that revealed just how far her desperation extended. She approached her cousin Moses Martinez and asked him to attack Kendra with a baseball bat. She told him it would be simple, quick, and that she would pay him. She even showed him the baseball bat she wanted him to use. Moses declined. She then approached her friend Jennifer Escobar. She made the same pitch. She wanted Jennifer to assault Kendra badly enough to put her in a coma. That would give Brenda time, she reasoned, to win Ricky back while Kendra was incapacitated. Jennifer was horrified and refused. Brenda then escalated. She offered Jennifer $2,000 and a supply of drugs if she would kill Kendra instead. Not injure her, kill her. Jennifer refused again and again. This is where understanding Brenda's mental state becomes critical. She had convinced herself that Kendra wasn't even real in some sense. She told people that Kendra was an imposter who had replaced the real Ricky. She was depressed to the point where she couldn't work her job. She was missing shifts because she was too consumed with tracking Ricky and Kendra's movements. Jennifer, who knew Brenda well, became deeply concerned. Not because Brenda seemed troubled, but because Brenda had access to Ricky's house key. She had access to his bank accounts. And now she was actively soliciting people to kill his girlfriend. Jennifer understood that Brenda wasn't just having dark thoughts. She was in active preparation mode. Around this same time, Brenda met Crystal Cortes. Crystal was a single mother struggling to provide for her child. She had financial insecurity and limited options. She also had what she thought was a new friend in Brenda, who seemed stable and independent and successful. When Brenda confided in Crystal just 2 weeks after they met that she wanted Kendra Hatcher gone permanently, and when she said she was willing to pay for it, Crystal made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She said yes. The two women began a hunt. They drove through rough neighborhoods in Crystal's area, rolling up to strangers and asking them directly if they would kill someone for money and drugs. It's almost impossible to overstate how brazen this was. They weren't subtle. They weren't careful. They were just driving around soliciting murder. Person after person said no. It became clear that despite Brenda's conviction that she had cartel connections and could make things happen, most criminals on the street could recognize a bad deal when they heard one. Then they met Kristopher Love. He was 31 years old, a small-time marijuana dealer with a history of making poor decisions. When Brenda and Crystal approached him with the job, he said yes. He discussed methods. He agreed that a firearm would be the quickest and most efficient way. Brenda promised him $3,000 in cash and drugs. She also promised him gang connections that she claimed to have. Love. At that point, they had their team. Brenda was the architect. Crystal was the driver and the logistics person. Love was the shooter. What they needed now was a target in motion. They needed to know exactly when and where Kendra would be vulnerable. So Brenda and Crystal did what they had been planning to do. They followed Kendra to work. They watched her at Smile Zone from across the street, using binoculars to observe her through the windows as she worked with her young patients. They followed her home. They discovered she parked in a secure garage in her apartment complex, but they also discovered something important. The garage gate required a resident's access card, but residents also sometimes tailgated, letting other cars follow them through. If you timed it right, you could slip in behind someone else's car and access the garage without any credentials. They tested this. They confirmed it would work. They began mapping Kendra's daily movements, understanding that she would leave Smile Zone at roughly the same time each day and drive home. By September 1st, they felt ready. They rehearsed their roles for the next day. Brenda dropped Crystal at a library in the morning on September 2nd. Jose Luis Ortiz, the owner of the Jeep Cherokee that Brenda had borrowed, dropped them back at his house. Brenda and Crystal picked up Kristopher Love. They drove to Smile Zone and parked where they could observe the entrance. They watched Kendra work. When she finally left her shift, they followed her. There was a moment where traffic delayed them slightly, and for a second it seemed like the plan might fail. But then they arrived at the secure parking garage of her apartment complex. A resident was entering. They followed that resident's car through the gate. They were inside. The time was 7:42 p.m. on September 2nd, 2015. Kendra was pulling into her parking space, thinking about her Mexico trip, thinking about her future with Ricky, thinking about anything except that the last moment of her life was beginning. Kristopher Love exited the Jeep. He approached Kendra from behind. What happened next was captured by the apartment complex security system and described in forensic detail by investigators. The gunshot residue on Kendra's hands indicated that her hands were placed behind her head. She was forced to her knees. She was executed style. The bullet entered her head while she was in a position of complete vulnerability. Residents heard the gunshot. Someone heard screaming. Within minutes, someone called 911. Kristopher Love jumped back into the Jeep. Crystal hit the accelerator. The Cherokee raced out of the garage. They drove to Love's location and dropped him off. Crystal then returned the borrowed Jeep to Jose Luis Ortiz. By the time she did, she already knew that Kendra Hatcher was dead. By the time she returned that vehicle, Ricky Paniagua had already received the news that his girlfriend had been murdered. The Dallas Police Department responded immediately. What they found in that parking garage made it clear this was no random robbery. There were critical details that didn't match that narrative: the gunshot residue patterns, the positioning, the execution-style nature of the killing. The missing purse, which at first suggested robbery, began to look more like a cover story. Within days, Dallas police released surveillance footage to the media showing the Jeep Cherokee and asking the public for help identifying the vehicle and the driver. Jose Luis Ortiz saw those images. He immediately understood that his vehicle was the one in the footage. He was terrified. He also understood that if he didn't come forward, suspicion could land on him. So he went to the police and told them everything. He told them about Brenda Delgado and Cortes. He told them that Brenda had asked to borrow his Jeep that morning and that she was suddenly anxious to return it. He told them that Brenda had warned him to stay silent, threatening that he could lose his immigration status if he got involved. He told them that Brenda had even offered to pay to have the Jeep repainted to hide its involvement in the crime. Once police had the names, the investigation moved quickly. Cortes was arrested. When questioned, she eventually confirmed her role. She drove the getaway car. She knew what was going to happen. She knew Brenda had orchestrated it. She cooperated with prosecutors, and in exchange, instead of life in prison, she received 35 years with the possibility of eventual parole. Kristopher Love was arrested when the murder weapon was found in his possession. He confessed and acknowledged Brenda as the mastermind. But Brenda Delgado was gone. When she understood that her co-conspirators had been arrested and were cooperating with investigators, she made a choice. She fled to Mexico. For 7 months, she was a fugitive, living under the assumption that she could escape accountability. but the FBI was looking for her. The case had garnered national attention. Kendra Hatcher's story had resonated with people. The image of this young woman whose only crime was falling in love with the wrong man, whose only mistake was not knowing she was being watched by someone losing their grip on reality, had captured the public imagination. In April 2016, Brenda Delgado was located in Torreon, Mexico, and arrested. She was extradited back to the United States under conditions that prohibited the death penalty. The Mexican government does not have capital punishment, and they would not extradite her if she faced execution. At trial, Brenda denied responsibility. She claimed she had no knowledge of any plot to kill Kendra. She presented an alibi. She claimed to have been at a restaurant with Jose Luis Ortiz at the time of the murder. But Cortes testified to the contrary. She detailed the months of planning. She described the surveillance. She detailed the moment when Love returned to the Jeep after killing Kendra and how Brenda later called her and asked, "Did the task get completed? Did the murder happen?" A Dallas County jury deliberated for 18 minutes. They convicted Brenda Delgado of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Brenda showed no emotion. When Kendra's family gave victim impact statements, when her mother told Brenda that she would spend her life behind cold steel bars for her miserable, pathetic existence, Brenda's face remained blank. Her sister Ashley Turner told Brenda directly, "You will go down as one of the most hated women in Dallas, maybe even in America," but there was no reaction, no remorse, no acknowledgement of what her obsession had cost. The impact of Kendra's death extended far beyond the crime scene. Her close friend Tammy Patino, who had known Kendra since school and remained close in Dallas, said that it became difficult to feel joy or carefree anymore. Her natural outgoing personality had been damaged by the grief and the fear that comes from knowing that evil like this actually exists. The patients at Smile Zone who adored Kendra struggled to understand why three complete strangers who never even spoke to her, who had no personal grudge against her, had decided that her life was worth taking. Her parents lost their daughter. Ricky Paniagua lost the love of his life just hours before they were supposed to leave for Mexico. And Brenda Delgado, sitting in a cell for life without parole, has to live every single day with the understanding that her obsession, her inability to move on, and her descent into madness cost an innocent woman her life. She has to understand that she took away someone's mother, someone's sister, someone's best friend, someone who was actively making the world better. She has to live with that, and she will live with that forever. This is the cost of obsession without boundaries. This is the cost of jealousy that consumes a mind completely. This is the story of why sometimes the most dangerous person in your life isn't a stranger in a parking garage. It's someone you know, someone you trusted, someone you thought cared about you, someone who cared too much in all the wrong ways. This is U.S. Crime Files. Subscribe for more cases that explore the darkest impulses of the human mind.